What if you woke up tomorrow and realized you were living two lives at once? Not a dream, not a delusion, but actually existing in two different times simultaneously. Trapped between moments, unable to fully return to either one. It sounds impossible, but the 10 cases you're about to hear suggest otherwise. These are real accounts of people who claim they became stuck between two timelines, and their stories will make you question everything you think you know about time itself. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, opening your eyes, and realizing you're not in your bedroom. You're in a house you haven't seen in over 30 years. The wallpaper is different, the furniture is old, and when you look in the mirror, staring back at you is an 8-year-old child. But here's the terrifying part. You still have all your adult memories. You know who you are, you know what year it should be, and yet somehow, impossibly, you're trapped in the body of your childhood self, living a morning that already happened decades ago. Now imagine this doesn't just happen once, it happens every single day. That is the reality Marcus Webb claims he has been living for over 5 years. And his story is one of the most disturbing accounts of temporal displacement ever documented. Marcus Webb was a 41-year-old accountant living in Columbus, Ohio. He had a wife named Jennifer, a modest home, and a completely ordinary life. But everything changed on a cold evening in October 2019 when Marcus was driving home on Interstate 71. A truck swerved into his lane. Marcus overcorrected. His car spun across 3 lanes of traffic before slamming into the median barrier. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Miraculously, Marcus walked away with only minor bruises. Doctors found nothing wrong. No head trauma, no internal injuries, nothing that could explain what would happen next. The following morning, Marcus woke up in his childhood bedroom. The posters on the walls were the same ones he remembered from 1987. The rotary phone sat on the hallway table, and downstairs, his mother, who had passed away in 2014, was cooking breakfast. Marcus was 8 years old again. He could smell the bacon. He could hear the television playing a Reagan-era news broadcast. He could feel the wool carpet under his bare feet. Everything was real. Everything was tangible, and he was utterly terrified. For nearly 4 hours, Marcus lived as his childhood self, walking through a morning that had already happened 32 years earlier. He ate breakfast with his parents. He walked to school. He had conversations with people who were now dead. And then, at exactly noon, everything changed. The world around him began to flicker. The colors bled together. A sharp pain split through his skull. And suddenly, violently, he was back. He woke up gasping in his Columbus bedroom, his wife shaking him, asking why he had been unresponsive for hours. That was the first day. But it wasn't the last. Every single morning since October 2019, Marcus Webb has woken up in 1987. He lives as a child until noon, experiencing a past that feels completely real. Then the timeline tears and he snaps back to the present. He has now documented over 1,800 of these episodes. His wife initially thought he was suffering from some kind of psychotic break. Doctors ran every test imaginable: MRIs, CT scans, psychological evaluations. They found nothing. Marcus was not hallucinating. His brain showed no abnormalities. And yet, the phenomenon continued. But then, Jennifer discovered something that changed everything. While cleaning out Marcus's late mother's attic, she found a box of old photographs from a 1987 neighborhood barbecue. In one image, young Marcus stands in the background, holding a paper plate. But partially visible at the edge of the frame is an adult man. His watch, his posture, even the shape of his shoulders match Marcus's current appearance exactly. The photograph was taken in 1987, but the man in it appears to be Marcus from 2019. Some researchers call this temporal echo syndrome, a theory suggesting that consciousness can fracture across time after severe trauma. Others believe Marcus's accident caused what they call a timeline bleed, where two eras overlap within a single mind. But the most unsettling theory is this. What if Marcus isn't traveling at all? What if his past and present selves have become the same person, existing simultaneously in both moments, unable to separate? Marcus continues to live two lives every day. But recently, something has shifted. The people in 1987 have started looking at him differently. His childhood friends pause mid-sentence and stare. His mother tilts her head as if she's seeing something she can't quite understand. They're beginning to sense that something is wrong, and Marcus is terrified of what happens when they finally figure it out. If his past rejects him, where does he go? And if he belongs to neither timeline, does he truly exist at all? What would you do if you looked into a mirror and the face staring back wasn't yours, not a stranger, not a trick of the light, but you, unmistakably you, only 30 years older, wrinkled skin, gray hair, hollow, sunken eyes that have seen decades you haven't lived yet. Now imagine that reflection follows you everywhere, every mirror, every window, every puddle on the street. No matter where you look, the elderly version of yourself looks back. That is exactly what happened to Elena Varga, and her story is one of the most haunting cases of temporal displacement ever recorded. Elena Varga was a 34-year-old graphic designer living in Budapest, Hungary. She was successful, healthy, and by all accounts, completely ordinary. But in March 2016, everything changed. Her grandmother had passed away 2 months earlier, and Elena traveled to her old apartment to collect some belongings. The apartment felt frozen in time. Dusty photographs lined the walls. The smell of lavender and old books filled the air. Elena walked through the rooms slowly, touching objects her grandmother had treasured, and then she stepped into the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was antique, framed in tarnished brass. Elena glanced at her reflection casually, the way anyone would, but the face looking back stopped her cold. The woman in the mirror had deep wrinkles carved into her skin. Her hair was thin and silver. Her eyes were clouded with age. Elena stumbled backward, heart pounding, convinced she was seeing a ghost. But the reflection moved exactly as she did. Every gesture, every breath. It was her. It was unmistakably her, only impossibly horrifyingly old. Elena fled the apartment the day, telling herself it was grief, stress, exhaustion. But when she returned home and looked into her own bathroom mirror, the elderly face was still there. It followed her to work. It appeared in shop windows. It stared back from her phone screen when the glass caught the light. The reflection had attached itself to her, and it would not let go. Medical examinations confirmed that Elena's physical body was completely normal for a 34-year-old woman. But when doctors photographed her reflection, the images told a different story. The photographs showed an elderly woman, approximately 65 years old, standing where Elena stood. Doctors were baffled. They called it a perceptual anomaly and referred her to psychiatrists. But Elena wasn't delusional. She was coherent, rational, and terrified. Because in August 2016, the reflection did something that made everything worse. It started moving on its own. Elena recorded herself standing in front of a mirror, hoping to document the phenomenon. When she reviewed the footage, her blood ran cold. In the video, her reflection's lips were moving, forming words that Elena herself was not speaking. She enhanced the audio as much as possible. The sound was faint, distorted, barely audible. But the words were clear. Don't go back. Don't go back. Elena had been planning to return to her grandmother's apartment to finish clearing it out. She canceled the trip immediately. The reflection stopped mouthing words after that. But it never returned to normal. It remained elderly, staring at her from every reflective surface with eyes that seemed to hold a terrible knowledge. Some researchers believe Elena glimpsed herself from a parallel timeline, an alternate version who aged normally in a different reality. Others suggest her grandmother's apartment sits on what they call a temporal thin spot, a location where timelines overlap and bleed into each other. But the most disturbing theory is this. What if Elena's reflection is her future self, desperately trying to communicate across time through the only medium available? What was she being warned about? What would have happened if she had returned to that apartment? Elena is now 42 years old, but her reflection appears to be approximately 72. They are aging in parallel, separated by exactly 30 years. She has learned to live with it, though she admits the experience never stops being unsettling. In a recent interview, she said something that has haunted researchers ever since. Sometimes I catch her smiling when I'm not. Is Elena sharing her existence with a version of herself from another timeline? And what happens when the reflection finally reaches the end of its life? Will Elena feel it? Will she know? Or will she simply look into a mirror one day and find no one looking back at all? Imagine you and your twin sister were born at the exact same moment, same hospital, same minute, same first breath of life. You grew up together, aged together, shared everything together. Now, imagine waking up one day and discovering that your twin is 3 years older than you. Not 3 years ahead in maturity or experience, 3 years older biologically. Her cells have aged, her body has changed, and somehow, impossibly, the two of you are no longer the same age. That is exactly what happened to Yuki and Mika Nakamura, and their story remains one of the most scientifically baffling cases of temporal displacement ever documented. Yuki and Mika Nakamura were born on August 12, 1975, in Kobe, Japan. They were identical twins in every sense of the word. Same face, same voice, same laugh. Growing up, even their parents sometimes struggled to tell them apart. They finished each other's sentences. They shared the same dreams. They were, in every meaningful way, two halves of the same person. But on January 17, 1995, everything changed. The Great Hanshin earthquake struck at 5:46 in the morning, magnitude 6.9. Buildings collapsed, fires erupted. Over 6,000 people died in the destruction. The twins, then 19 years old, were in different parts of the city when the ground began to shake. Mika was near the waterfront when it happened. She felt the tremor, dove under a doorway, and emerged within minutes, physically unharmed. But Yuki was not so fortunate. She was inside a concrete apartment building that collapsed around her. Rescue teams didn't reach her for 72 hours. When they finally pulled her from the rubble, she was dehydrated, disoriented, but alive. And she insisted something impossible. She claimed only a few minutes had passed. Not 3 days, not 72 hours, just minutes. She remembered the shaking, the collapse, and then silence. She closed her eyes in the darkness. When she opened them, rescuers were lifting her out. To Yuki, almost no time had elapsed at all, but her body told a different story. Medical examinations conducted immediately after her rescue revealed something that doctors could not explain. Yuki's cellular structure showed signs of aging consistent with someone approximately 3 years older than her biological age. Her telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that shorten as we age, had degraded significantly. Her bone density had decreased, her skin elasticity had changed. By every measurable standard, Yuki Nakamura was no longer 19 years old. She was biologically 22. Mika, examined the same day, showed completely normal results for a 19-year-old. The twins were no longer the same age. At first, doctors assumed it was a testing error. They ran the examinations again and again. The results were always the same. Yuki had aged 3 years and 72 hours. Or, perhaps more accurately, she had experienced 3 years that the rest of the world had not. The gap between the sisters has persisted ever since. At their 40th birthday celebration in 2015, the difference was visible to everyone. Yuki looked noticeably older. Her hair had begun to gray. Fine lines had appeared around her eyes. Medical tests confirmed what the family already knew. Yuki was biologically 43. Mika was 40. 3 years apart, despite being born in the same minute. Some researchers believe Yuki entered what they call a temporal compression zone during the earthquake, a pocket of space where time moved faster than in the surrounding world. Others propose she was briefly pulled into a parallel timeline, where 3 years passed, then returned to hours carrying the physical evidence of that lost time. But the most disturbing detail is something Yuki herself has mentioned only rarely. She occasionally has memories of events she never experienced, a wedding she never attended, a funeral for someone she doesn't recognize, a child she never had. 3 years of life that exist only in fragments, like dreams she cannot fully recall. Today, Yuki is biologically 51. Mika is 48. They still look similar, but the 3-year gap is undeniable. Yuki says she feels like she is borrowing time from another life. Mika wonders if she will ever catch up, or if her sister will always be 3 years closer to the end. Were the twins separated by the earthquake, or were they torn apart by something far stranger, something that fractured time itself and left one sister permanently ahead of the other? Imagine picking up your phone and hearing a voicemail from yourself, not a recording you made, not a prank from a friend, but your own voice, older and exhausted, speaking to you from 68 years in the future. The message contains a warning, and that warning saves your life. Now imagine this happens again, and again, and again. Dozens of messages from a version of yourself that hasn't been born yet. Each one predicting events that haven't happened. Each one proving accurate. That is exactly what David Chen claims has been happening to him since 2021. And his story is one of the most chilling accounts of temporal communication ever documented. David Chen was a 37-year-old software engineer living in London. He had a comfortable life, a steady career, and no particular interest in the paranormal. But on a quiet evening in June 2021, his phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. The caller ID displayed his own number. Curious, he pressed play. The voice on the recording was unmistakably his, but different. Raspier, older. Worn down by decades of life he hadn't yet lived. The message was brief and urgent. David, this is you. I'm calling from 2089. You need to listen. Do not take the 7:15 train tomorrow morning. Drive to work instead. Please, trust me. David almost deleted it. He assumed it was some kind of elaborate hoax, a deep fake, or a prank from a colleague with too much time. But something about the voice unsettled him. The cadence, the pauses, the way it pronounced certain words. It sounded exactly like him. Against his better judgment, he drove to work the next morning instead of taking the train. At 7:43 a.m., the 7:15 train derailed outside Paddington Station. 17 people died. David would have been on that train. He would have been sitting in the third carriage, the one that crumpled like paper against the platform barrier. The voicemail had saved his life. Since that day, David has received 47 voicemails, all from the same source. His own number, his own voice. The year 2089. Each message contains warnings. Some are deeply personal. Don't sign the contract in October. They're going to betray you. Some are terrifyingly global. Weeks before a devastating earthquake struck Turkey in 2023, a message arrived containing only 6 words. The ground is about to open. Every single prediction has proven accurate. Every single warning has come true. The messages are never longer than 90 seconds. The voice sounds increasingly desperate with each one. In some recordings, sirens wail in the background. In others, distant explosions echo through the static. His future self never explains how the calls are possible. He never describes the technology or the circumstances. He only delivers the warnings, and then the line goes dead. But in March 2024, David received a message that made him finally go public with his story. The voice said, "I don't have many calls left. They're going to find me. When they do, you'll stop receiving these." David asked researchers to analyze the recordings. Audio forensics confirmed the voice matches his own vocal patterns with 98.7% accuracy. The metadata shows no signs of manipulation. The timestamps are consistent. Whatever these messages are, they are not fabricated. Some believe David is receiving genuine transmissions through temporal communication technology that won't exist for decades. Others propose the voicemails come from a parallel timeline, a version of David trying to correct mistakes in his own past. But the most disturbing theory is this. What if the messages aren't meant to save David at all? What if his future self is trying to prevent something far larger, and David is simply a necessary piece of a puzzle he doesn't yet understand? As of late 2024, David has received no new messages in 4 months. It is the longest silence since the voicemails began. He checks his phone constantly, waiting for his own voice to call. "The silence terrifies me more than the warnings ever did," he says. Did his future self finally run out of time? And if the messages have stopped, does that mean David's future has already changed? Or does it mean it's now too late to change anything at all? The next 3 cases are darker, stranger, and far more unexplainable. If you're watching without subscribing, now's the time. Don't miss what's coming next. Imagine boarding a bus for a simple day trip. You find a seat by the window, close your eyes for what feels like just a few minutes. And when you wake up, you're holding a leather journal you've never seen before. You open it and recognize the handwriting immediately. It's yours. But the entries span 40 years of a life you haven't lived yet. A marriage, children, grandchildren, your own death. And somehow, impossibly, you remember all of it. That is exactly what happened to Anna Kowalsski on September the 3rd, 1994. and her story remains one of the most heartbreaking cases of temporal displacement ever recorded. Anna Kowalsski was a 28-year-old librarian living in Krakow, Poland. She was unmarried, had no children, and lived a quiet, uneventful life surrounded by books. On that September morning, she boarded the 7:15 a.m. bus from Krakow to Wieliczka for a day trip to the famous salt mines. She found a seat near the back, leaned her head against the cool glass window, and drifted off to sleep as the bus pulled away from the station. When she woke up, the bus had arrived at its destination. Passengers were gathering their belongings and filing toward the exit. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. Clutched in her hands was a worn leather journal she had never seen before in her life. Anna opened it with trembling fingers. The first entry was dated September 3rd, 1994. The handwriting was unmistakably her own, but as she flipped through the pages, her confusion turned to horror. The journal contained over 200 entries spanning 4 decades. It documented a wedding to a man named Piotr in 1996, the birth of 2 children, Tomasz in 1998 and Iwa in 2001, promotions at work, family vacations, holiday celebrations, arguments and reconciliations, the slow, beautiful, painful arc of an entire human life, written in her own hand. The final entry was dated August 29, 2034. It described her own funeral from someone else's perspective, yet it was still written in her handwriting. The last line read simply, "I'm finally going back. They won't remember me there, but I'll remember everything." Anna sat frozen on that empty bus for nearly an hour, because here was the terrifying part. She remembered all of it. She could picture Piotr's face with perfect clarity, a man she had never met. She knew her children's birthdays, their first words, their favorite foods. She remembered holding her granddaughter for the first time. She remembered the weight of grief when her mother passed. 40 years of memories flooded her mind, vivid and detailed and emotionally overwhelming. But none of it had happened. She was still 28, still unmarried, still childless. The life in that journal existed only in the pages and in her mind. Handwriting experts later confirmed that every entry was written by Anna, but ink analysis revealed something strange. Different sections were written with different pens, and the chemical composition of the inks suggested they were manufactured across several decades. The journal appeared to have been written over 40 years, yet Anna had possessed it for only a 2-hour bus ride. Psychologists examined her extensively. They found no signs of mental illness. Her memories were consistent, detailed, and emotionally authentic. She could describe events from 2034 with the same clarity as events from her actual childhood. Whatever had happened to Anna on that bus, it was not delusion. It was not imagination. It was something else entirely. Some researchers believe Anna's consciousness was temporarily transferred to a parallel timeline where she lived a complete life, then returned carrying the memories and the physical evidence. Others propose she entered a temporal fold where subjective time moved differently, allowing her to experience decades in mere hours. But the most haunting theory is this. What if the journal represents the life Anna was always meant to live, a future that somehow collapsed into a single moment and left her holding the remains? Anna never married. She said she couldn't bear to fall in love again after already losing one husband. She never had children. "I already raised Tomasz and Oza," she told an interviewer in 2003. "I can't do it again, knowing it might not be real." Every year, on September 3rd, she reads the journal from beginning to end. The question that haunts her is the same one that haunts everyone who hears her story. Which life was real, and which one was the dream? Imagine checking into a hotel room for a single night. You set down your suitcase, lock the door behind you, and settle in for the evening. Security cameras record you entering, but you never leave. Not the next morning, not ever. Your belongings remain untouched. Your bed is still made. And somehow, impossibly, you appear in a photograph taken in that exact same room 56 years before you were born. That is exactly what happened to Robert Hale at the Meridian Hotel in New Orleans. And his case remains one of the most disturbing disappearances ever connected to temporal displacement. The Meridian Hotel was built in 1923, a grand establishment that had hosted politicians, musicians, and wealthy travelers for nearly a century. By 2008, it had been renovated and modernized, but it still carried the weight of its history in every creaking floorboard and flickering chandelier. On October 14th, 2008, a man named Robert Hale walked through the lobby and approached the front desk. He paid for one night in cash and requested a specific room, room 314. The clerk found it odd that he asked for a particular room, but the request was accommodated. Hale took his key, carried his suitcase to the third floor, and disappeared inside. Security footage captured him entering at 9:47 p.m. The door closed behind him, and Robert Hale was never seen leaving that room again. The next morning, housekeeping knocked on the door and received no response. When they entered using a master key, they found the room empty, but everything Robert Hale had brought with him was still there. His suitcase sat unopened near the closet. His toiletries were arranged on the bathroom counter. His shoes rested neatly beside the bed. The television remote lay on the nightstand as if he had just set it down, but the man himself had vanished. And here was the detail that made investigators' blood run cold. The door had been locked from the inside. The chain was still engaged. There was no window large enough for a person to exit through. No secret passages, no damage to the walls or ceiling. Robert Hale had simply ceased to exist inside that room. Police filed a missing persons report, but the investigation went nowhere. No witnesses, no leads, no body. The case went cold within weeks. Robert Hale became just another name in a folder, another mystery with no resolution. Until 4 years later, when someone discovered something that changed everything. In 2012, the hotel's owner began compiling a historical archive to celebrate the building's upcoming 90th anniversary. Local collectors donated photographs, documents, and memorabilia from the hotel's past. Among the donated items was a photograph from 1952, taken during a grand reopening celebration after a renovation. The image showed well-dressed guests gathered in the lobby, champagne glasses raised, smiling for the camera. But standing near the staircase, partially obscured by the crowd, was a face that made the archivist drop the photograph in shock. It was Robert Hale, same face, same posture, same unusual birthmark visible on his neck. The photograph was authenticated. It was taken on October 14th, 1952, exactly 56 years before Robert Hale checked into room 314. Same date, same hotel, same man. Only the century had changed. Some researchers believe room 314 exists as what they call a temporal anchor, a fixed point where past and present overlap. They theorize that anyone who enters that room on October 14th risks crossing through to another era. Others suggest Robert Hale didn't disappear at all. He was pulled backward through time and has been living in 1952 ever since, trapped in an era that was never his own. Robert Hale's laptop was recovered from the room after his disappearance. Investigators examined his browsing history. His final search, time-stamped at 9:42 p.m., just 5 minutes before he vanished, was chilling in its simplicity. Meridian Hotel history, October 14th. Did he know what was about to happen? Was he looking for something? Or did he find exactly what he came for? Room 314 remains in use at the Meridian Hotel today. Staff report cold spots, objects that move on their own, and the sound of footsteps when the room is empty. Robert Hale's family still searches for answers, but some believe there is nothing left to find, because Robert Hale isn't missing. He's simply no longer in this time. Over 70% of viewers watching right now haven't subscribed yet. If these cases fascinate you, hit subscribe now because the most disturbing stories are still ahead. Imagine your 7-year-old daughter suddenly begins speaking a language that hasn't been spoken in over 800 years. Not baby talk, not gibberish, but a fluent ancient tongue that died out centuries before she was born. She describes a village by a fjord, wooden longhouses, and Viking ships being built on the shore. She draws maps of places that don't exist on any modern chart. And then archaeologists discover that those places are real, buried beneath the earth, exactly where she said they would be. That is exactly what happened to Sophia Anderson. And her story is one of the most scientifically inexplicable cases of temporal existence ever documented. Sophia Anderson was born in 2008 in Stockholm, Sweden. She was a happy, healthy child with loving parents and no unusual medical history. But when she turned 5 years old, something changed. Sophia began speaking in strange phrases that neither her parents nor anyone around them could understand. The words sounded ancient, guttural, completely unlike modern Swedish. Concerned, her parents consulted linguists at Stockholm University. What the experts told them left the entire family speechless. Sophia was speaking Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, a tongue that had not been naturally spoken by anyone on Earth for approximately 800 years. There are no native speakers of Old Norse alive today. There are no communities where children could absorb it through immersion. The language exists only in historical texts, academic studies, and museum reconstructions. And yet, Sophia spoke it as fluently and naturally as if it were her mother tongue. When researchers asked Sophia where she learned these words, her answer was even more disturbing. She described her other home, a village nestled beside a fjord, where the water turned silver in the morning light. She spoke of wooden longhouses with carved pillars, of blacksmiths hammering metal near a great forge, of ships with dragon prows being constructed on the rocky shore. She talked about the chieftain who led her village, a man with a scarred face and a golden arm ring. She described seasonal festivals, burial rituals, and daily routines with a level of detail that no 5-year-old should possess about any subject, let alone a civilization that vanished a millennium ago. Her parents initially assumed it was imagination, perhaps inspired by picture books or television programs about Vikings. But then Sophia began drawing maps, detailed maps showing the layout of her village, the position of the burial mound, the location of the forge relative to the Great Hall. She drew them over and over with remarkable consistency. In 2017, archaeologists announced a stunning discovery. A previously unknown Viking settlement had been unearthed in Norway at the exact location Sophia had drawn. The burial mound was there. The forge was there. The Great Hall with its carved pillars was there. Everything matched. Sophia had mapped a place that modern science had not yet found. Researchers conducted brain scans while Sophia described her other life. The results were extraordinary. Her neural activity patterns matched those associated with long-term memory recall, not imagination or fabrication. Her brain genuinely believed it was remembering real experiences, not inventing fictional ones. One neurologist on the study said something that has haunted the scientific community ever since. Her brain doesn't know the difference between her two lives. To her, both are equally real. Sophia named people from her Viking existence, names that historians later found inscribed on runestone fragments that weren't translated until years after she first spoke them. She described a chieftain whose existence wasn't confirmed until 2019, when his burial site was discovered containing artifacts that matched her descriptions perfectly. Today, Sophia is 16 years old. She still speaks Old Norse when she is tired or under stress. She says the slipping between lives has become less frequent, but has never stopped entirely. Some mornings she wakes up in her Stockholm bedroom. Other mornings, she says, she wakes up in the longhouse by the fjord, surrounded by people who know her by a different name. I never know which life I'll open my eyes to, she told a documentary crew in 2023. Is Sophia experiencing reincarnation? Or is her consciousness somehow bridging a 1,000-year gap, existing simultaneously in two eras separated by 10 centuries? And if she truly lives in both times, which version of Sophia is the original and which is merely an echo? Imagine finding an old home video from decades before you were born. You watch the grainy footage of a backyard birthday party, family members laughing and celebrating in the summer sun. But then you notice something strange beneath the audio. Another layer of sound, voices speaking quietly, almost hidden beneath the music and chatter. You enhance the recording and realize with mounting horror that the voices are discussing events from today, events that haven't happened yet. And one of those voices is unmistakably your own. That is exactly what happened to Daniel Peterson when he digitized his family's old tapes. And what he discovered has haunted him ever since. The Peterson family lived in Duluth, Minnesota. Harold and Margaret Peterson raised 3 children in a modest home on a quiet street. James, Sarah, and Michael grew up surrounded by love, birthday cakes, and backyard barbecues. In August 1978, Harold purchased a portable video camera, an expensive novelty at the time, and filmed a birthday party for his youngest son, Michael. The footage shows balloons tied to fence posts, children running across freshly cut grass, and Margaret carrying a homemade cake with 8 candles. It was an ordinary afternoon captured on magnetic tape. At least, that's what everyone believed for over 40 years. In 2021, Sarah's grandson Daniel decided to digitize the family's old recordings before they degraded beyond repair. He transferred the birthday party footage to his computer and began cleaning up the audio. That's when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. Beneath the ambient sounds of the party, barely audible, was another conversation. It sounded like multiple people talking, their voices layered underneath the original recording, like whispers from another room. Daniel isolated the hidden audio track and amplified it. What he heard changed everything he thought he knew about time. The voices were discussing events from 2024. They mentioned a presidential election, a stock market crash, a family member's illness. The conversation was casual, matter of fact, as if the speakers were simply catching up over coffee. But the events they described hadn't happened when the tape was recorded. They hadn't happened in 2021 when Daniel discovered them. Some of them still haven't happened today. And here is the detail that made Daniel's blood turn to ice. He recognized one of the voices immediately. It was his own. Not similar to his voice. Identical. Daniel played the recording for his family. They identified other voices as well. Sarah's voice, older and tired, discussing Grandpa Harold's funeral and how the house sold for $340,000. Harold had died in 1996. The house sold in 2022 for exactly that amount. Another voice mentioned James's grandchildren by name, children who weren't born until 2015. The hidden conversation appeared to be taking place in 2024, yet it was embedded on a tape recorded in 1978, decades before most of the speakers were even born. Audio forensics experts examined the original tape. Their findings were as disturbing as the content itself. The hidden layer was not edited in after the fact. It was recorded simultaneously with the birthday party. The magnetic patterns showed no signs of manipulation or splicing. Somehow, the sounds of 1978 and the voices of 2024 existed on the same tape, recorded at the same moment, separated by 46 years that shouldn't have been able to touch. Some researchers believe the recording device accidentally captured what they call a temporal bleed, audio from a future moment that somehow imprinted itself on the magnetic tape. Others propose the camera briefly existed in two times at once, capturing sound from both eras simultaneously. But the most disturbing theory is this. What if the 2024 conversation was always destined to exist on that tape? What if it was recorded before the speakers were even born, waiting to be discovered? Daniel has listened to the full recording dozens of times. Most of the predictions have already come true, but one segment remains unclear, spoken through heavy static. It mentions the accident in December 2026. No other details, just those words. The Peterson family doesn't know what it means, but they're waiting. And every day that passes brings them closer to finding out whether the tape is a warning, a prophecy, or simply a glimpse of a future that was always going to arrive. Imagine standing in a field on your own property, looking at rows of wheat swaying in the afternoon breeze. Now, imagine your friend standing just 3 feet away, looking at the exact same spot and seeing something completely different. Not wheat, but ancient stone ruins, crumbling walls, medieval foundations covered in moss and ivy. You both look at the same ground, the same coordinates, the same patch of earth. But you exist in different centuries. That is exactly what happens on James Whitmore's farm in rural Somerset, England. And his story is one of the most visually documented cases of temporal overlap ever recorded. James Whitmore is a 58-year-old farmer whose family has worked the same land for 3 generations. The property spans several hundred acres of rolling English countryside, dotted with hedgerows and old stone walls. James knows every inch of it. He has walked these fields since childhood, planted crops, raised livestock, and buried beloved dogs beneath the old oak tree near the barn. But in 2012, he began noticing something deeply unsettling about the North Field. The crops there would occasionally appear wrong, flattened in strange patterns, different colors than the surrounding wheat. Sometimes the plants seemed to vanish entirely, replaced by bare earth or wild grasses that shouldn't have been growing there. James assumed disease, animal damage, or some kind of soil contamination. He was wrong. In the summer of 2012, a historian friend visited the farm. They walked together toward the North Field, discussing local history and the age of the property. But as they approached the field's edge, the historian stopped mid-sentence and stared. "Where did those ruins come from?" he asked, pointing at something James couldn't see. James saw only wheat, golden stalks rippling in the wind. But his friend described stone walls rising from the earth, a collapsed tower, medieval foundations stretching across the landscape. They stood 3 feet apart. They looked at the same location. They saw entirely different realities. When they switched positions, their vision switched too. James suddenly saw the ruins. His friend saw the wheat. The phenomenon was tied to physical location, not perception. Over the following years, hundreds of visitors reported the same experience. Some see the modern farm exactly as it exists today. Others see ancient structures, sometimes Roman, sometimes medieval, occasionally what appears to be prehistoric earthworks. Photographs taken by different people at the same moment show completely different landscapes. One image captured by a researcher using infrared technology revealed something extraordinary. Both realities appeared in the same frame, overlapping like 2 transparencies placed on top of each other, modern crops superimposed over crumbling stone, 2 centuries existing in the same space. James himself sees the field flicker. One moment, it's his farm. The next, ancient walls emerge from the ground like bones rising from the soil. It's like 2 radio stations competing for the same frequency, he says. Historical research uncovered something remarkable. The land appears in the Domesday Book of 1086, where medieval scribes recorded it as the site of a manor house that was and was not. The same phenomenon documented nearly 1,000 years ago. Whatever is happening in that field has been happening for centuries. In 2023, the situation became far more dangerous. James's daughter walked into the north field one afternoon and didn't return for 6 hours. When she finally emerged at the field's edge, she was shaking uncontrollably, covered in mud, and utterly disoriented. She claimed she had been gone only minutes, but she described walking through the medieval version of the property. She saw people in period clothing who stared at her in terror before she snapped back to the present. Since then, James has fenced off the north field entirely. He doesn't let anyone enter. The land remains divided, a modern farm with a medieval shadow bleeding through the soil. Researchers continue to study the phenomenon, but no explanation has emerged. James sometimes stands at the fence line in the evening, watching the field shift between centuries as the light fades. "I own this land," he says quietly, "but I'm not sure it belongs to this time." And the question that haunts everyone who has witnessed the phenomenon remains unanswered. What happens if the 2 eras stop flickering and one of them finally wins? Imagine experiencing every moment of your life at once, not remembering the past or predicting the future, but living all of it simultaneously. Your birth, your death, every conversation you will ever have, every breath you will ever take, all happening right now, layered on top of each other in an endless, overwhelming present. Now, imagine trying to explain this to someone who experiences time normally. They would call you insane. They would lock you away. And that is exactly what happened to the man known only as Subject 7. His story is the most disturbing case of temporal displacement ever documented. And it begins with a man walking out of the woods near a government laboratory with knowledge he should not possibly possess. July 1992, Eastern Long Island. New York. A disoriented man emerged from the dense forest surrounding Brookhaven National Laboratory, a facility known for cutting-edge research in particle physics and nuclear energy. He was barefoot. His clothing was strange, made of materials that didn't match any known era. He spoke in fragmented, disjointed sentences, as if he were answering questions that hadn't been asked yet. When authorities approached him and demanded identification, he looked at them with hollow, exhausted eyes and said something that would haunt investigators for decades. "I don't have a name anymore. They called me Subject 7. Over the following weeks, government personnel conducted extensive interviews with the man. What he described defied everything science understood about the nature of time. He claimed he had been part of an experiment at a classified facility, an experiment involving electromagnetic fields and temporal displacement. The goal was to send human consciousness forward through time, to glimpse possible futures. But something went catastrophically wrong. Instead of moving through time, Subject 7 became unstuck from it entirely. He now experienced all moments simultaneously. Past, present, and future collapsed into a single, unending now. Imagine hearing every conversation you will ever have at once, he told his interviewers. Imagine remembering your own death while you're still breathing. During his 1992 interviews, Subject 7 described events that hadn't happened yet. He mentioned towers falling in New York and planes used as weapons, 9 years before September 11th, 2001. He described a global pandemic that would shut down the world sometime in the early 2000s. He spoke of small glass rectangles that everyone would carry, devices that contained all human knowledge. He described machines that could think, speak, and create. Every single prediction he made has since come true. Investigators initially dismissed him as mentally ill. They are not dismissing him anymore. Subject 7 was never formally charged with any crime. He was placed under government observation, where he reportedly remains to this day. According to leaked documents, he is now in his early 80s, though he appeared to be approximately 40 when he emerged from those woods in 1992. He still speaks in fragmented timelines, answering questions before they are asked, referencing events that haven't occurred yet. In 2019, he reportedly told one interviewer something that has circulated through classified channels ever since. You're going to ask me about the collapse in 2031. I'll tell you now, no one survives it the way they think they will. No one has been able to determine what he means. No one knows if it can be prevented. The most disturbing aspect of Subject 7's existence is not what he knows. It is what he represents. If time is truly nonlinear, if past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, then Subject 7 might be the only person who perceives reality as it actually is. The rest of us move through time like travelers on a train, seeing only the scenery directly outside our window. But Subject 7 sees the entire landscape at once, every station, every destination, every terminus. To this day, no one has identified who Subject 7 was before the experiment. He has no fingerprints in any database, no dental records, no birth certificate. He exists, but officially he was never born. When asked where he comes from, he always gives the same answer. I come from everywhere. I come from now. I come from the end. Is Subject 7 a failed experiment, a government secret, or a glimpse of what happens when a human being falls through the cracks of time and can never find their way back? 10 survivors, 10 impossible stories. People who don't just remember the past or predict the future, they exist in both, trapped between timelines they can't escape. Maybe time isn't the straight line we assume. Maybe some people slip through the cracks and never fully return. What do you think? Could you be living between two moments right now without even knowing? Subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation. Some questions don't have answers, but that won't stop us from asking.